On the plains of Moab, as a new generation prepared to enter Canaan, old Moses stood, his voice echoing with history. He began, recounting their arduous journey from Horeb. He reminded them of Kadesh Barnea, where their fear and disobedience had sealed their fate. 40 years wandering the wilderness, a consequence of distrusting God's promise. The rebellious generation had perished. Then, Moses spoke of God's meticulous guidance, how they bypassed Edom, Moab, and Ammon, respecting the boundaries God had set for others. He highlighted divine provision. Not a single need went unmet during their decades in the barren lands. Finally, his tone shifted to triumph. They had not just wandered, they had conquered. God had delivered King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan into their hands, their mighty armies crushed, and their lands east of the Jordan distributed to Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. Moses reiterated that the Lord himself fought for Israel. He concluded with a poignant memory, his own denied plea to enter the promised land, and God's command to commission Joshua as their new leader. Still at the plains of Moab, Moses continued his fervent plea. He implored Israel to heed God's decrees given at Horeb, reminding them that obedience meant life and possession of the promised land. He issued a solemn warning, never to add or subtract from these commands, and above all, to shun idolatry, remembering the awesome, fiery presence of their unique God, who rescued them from Egypt. Disobedience, he cautioned, would lead to scattering, but repentance would bring restoration. Moses then powerfully represented the Ten Commandments, not as ancient history, but as a living covenant God made directly with them. His words built to the crescendo of the Shema: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. This foundational truth, he commanded, was not merely for personal devotion but for diligent, continuous teaching to their children, to be woven into every fabric of their daily lives, a constant reminder in their homes and on their persons. Forgetfulness and prosperity, he warned, would be their downfall. From the plains, Moses' voice grew stern. As Israel prepared to enter Canaan, he commanded total separation, utterly destroy the inhabitants and their idolatrous altars, make no covenants, no intermarriages. Their election was not due to their numbers or might, but to God's unwavering love and faithfulness. Obedience would bring divine favor and gradual victory. He then urged them to remember the 40 years of wilderness. It wasn't aimless wandering, but God's deliberate humbling, a test to teach dependence. Sustained by miraculous manna and unworn clothes. When prosperity inevitably came in the promised land, Moses warned against deadly pride, forgetting God, attributing success to their own strength. Finally, he hammered home the truth: they were not conquering Canaan due to their righteousness, for they were a stubborn people. Instead, it was because of the inhabitants' wickedness and God's faithful oath to their ancestors. Moses recalled their worst rebellion, the golden calf, reminding them of their inherent unworthiness and how God's fierce anger was only averted by his desperate intercession. Their past was a testament to God's grace, not their merit. Moses continued to impress upon Israel the gravity of their covenant. He reminded them of the new stone tablets, a testament to God's patient renewal after their great sin. His fervent message: God chose them not for their merit, but for his love. Therefore they must love him in return, with a circumcised heart, not just outward ritual, and extend justice to the vulnerable. He vividly recounted God's mighty acts, the plagues, the Red Sea, the earth swallowing the rebellious, illustrating the powerful choice before them: obedience bringing abundant blessings, disobedience, swift curses. Lay these words in your heart, he urged, and teach them diligently to your children, lest you forget. As they prepared for Canaan, a profound shift was commanded. Once across the Jordan, all pagan altars and symbols were to be utterly demolished. No longer would they worship just anywhere. All sacrifices, tithes, and vows must be brought to one single place God would choose for his name to dwell, a central sanctuary. This unified worship was paramount, a stark contrast to the idolatrous practices they were to eradicate, ensuring their devotion remained undivided and pure. In his final address, Moses delivered some of Israel's most challenging laws. Beginning with a stark warning against spiritual betrayal. He commanded them to show no mercy to any who would lead them to idolatry, be it a prophet, a family member, or an entire city. Such grave sin warranted utter destruction, a radical act to preserve the nation's spiritual purity. He then shifted to practical life, outlining laws that defined a holy people. Israel was forbidden from pagan mourning rites and given specific dietary instructions, marking them as distinct from the nations around them. The law of tithing was re-emphasized with 1/10 of their harvest and flocks to be set aside for the Lord. Finally, Moses introduced the radical concept of the sabbatical year. Every 7th year, debts owed by fellow Israelites were to be completely canceled, a powerful mechanism to prevent lasting poverty among them. Hebrew servants, too, were to be released after 6 years of service, granted generously from their masters' flocks and fields. These laws underscored a society built on justice, generosity, and unwavering trust in God's provision. Moses continued to lay the blueprint for Israel's life in the Promised Land, starting with their communal rhythm of worship. He detailed 3 annual festivals, Passover weeks, and booths, times when all men would gather at the Lord's chosen sanctuary, bringing joyful offerings. Justice at the city gates was paramount. No partiality was allowed. He then addressed leadership, particularly the future king. This ruler, an Israelite, must not accumulate excessive power or wealth, but humbly live by the law, reading it daily. Severe penalties were prescribed for idolatry, ensuring purity of worship. The priests and Levites, without land, would be sustained by the Lord's offerings. Moses sternly warned against pagan abominations like divination or child sacrifice, promising instead a future prophet, akin to himself, whom they must obey. Finally, he reiterated the cities of refuge, vital havens for those who accidentally caused another's death, providing protection from the avenger of blood, yet demanding careful judgment. The sanctity of property boundaries was affirmed, and the judicial system emphasized the need for multiple witnesses and strict retribution for false testimony, ensuring fairness and truth in all legal matters. As ancient Israel prepared for battle, Moses, guided by divine wisdom, laid down specific instructions. Before engaging the enemy, priests were to address the people, encouraging courage and reminding them of God's presence. Those who had built new houses, planted vineyards, or were newly married were exempted, ensuring they could enjoy their blessings. Even the faint-hearted were sent home, preventing their fear from spreading. When approaching a city, an offer of peace was to be extended. If accepted, the inhabitants would become forced labor. If not, and after a siege, all males were to be put to the sword, but women, children, and livestock could be taken as spoil. However, for cities within the Promised Land, all inhabitants were to be utterly destroyed to prevent the spread of idolatry. Moses then delved into civic laws. If an unidentifiable body was found, the elders of the nearest town were to perform a ritual atonement. Rules for taking female captives in war were outlined, emphasizing respectful treatment if taken as a wife. Laws regarding inheritance, a rebellious son, and the hanging of a criminal were also given, stressing the purity of the land. He detailed laws concerning lost animals, mixed materials, and sexual purity within the camp. Finally, regulations for those excluded from the assembly of the Lord, like Ammonites and Moabites, and for maintaining sanitary conditions, were established, emphasizing holiness in every aspect of life. Moses continued to impart God's laws, now focusing on the fabric of Israelite society. He spoke of divorce, emphasizing fairness, and preventing a woman from being remarried to her former husband if she had married another. Kidnapping was strictly forbidden, punishable by death, underscoring the value of human life. Laws concerning skin diseases were reiterated, stressing the importance of priestly examination and quarantine to maintain the camp's purity. When lending, collateral was not to be taken, if it was essential for survival. Like a millstone or a widow's cloak, showing compassion for the poor. Employers were commanded to pay daily laborers at the end of each day, preventing hardship. Justice was to be administered fairly, with parents not being punished for their children's sins, nor children for their parents. Strangers, orphans, and widows were to be treated with respect and provided for, with gleanings from fields and olive groves left for them. This showcased God's heart for the vulnerable. He then outlined laws for bodily discipline, limiting beatings to prevent excessive humiliation. Finally, Moses instructed the Israelites on offering their first fruits. Upon entering the Promised Land, they were to bring the first of their harvest to the priest, declaring God's faithfulness in bringing them out of Egypt and into a land of abundance. They were also to give a tithe every 3 years for the Levites, strangers, orphans, and widows. This act of giving was to be accompanied by a prayer, affirming their obedience to God's commands. These laws culminated in a call to covenant faithfulness, reminding them that by obeying, they would be a holy people to the Lord. As the Israelites stood poised to enter the Promised Land, Moses, with the elders, commanded a momentous ceremony upon crossing the Jordan. On Mount Ebal, large stones were to be set up, plastered, and inscribed with all the words of the law. An altar of unhewn stones was to be built there, for sacrifices of peace and fellowship, signifying their covenant with God. Across the valley, on Mount Gerizim, 6 tribes would stand to pronounce blessings upon those who obeyed God's commands. Conversely, on Mount Ebal, the other 6 tribes would declare curses upon those who disobeyed. 12 specific curses were recited, covering various transgressions from idolatry to injustice, with the people responding amen to each, solemnly affirming their commitment to the covenant. Moses then passionately reiterated the blessings of obedience, prosperity in every endeavor, abundant harvests, fruitful livestock, victory over enemies, and being established as a holy people. However, he also delivered a severe warning: the curses of disobedience would be catastrophic. These would include disease, famine, defeat in battle, exile, oppression, and ultimately, utter destruction. The land itself would turn barren, and they would become a byword among nations. Their suffering would be so profound that they would even resort to cannibalism in desperation. Finally, Moses called them to remember the covenant made with them at Horeb, and now renewed in Moab, urging them to choose life by obeying God's voice, that they might live and multiply in the land they were about to inherit. Deuteronomy 30 opens with a profound message of hope and restoration, even after impending exile. Moses declared that if, in their dispersion, they returned to the Lord with all their heart, God would gather them from the ends of the earth and bring them back to the land. He would circumcise their hearts, enabling them to truly love Him and live. This inner transformation was a promise distinct from the outward obedience previously emphasized. Moses then presented the ultimate choice: life and prosperity by loving and obeying God, or death and destruction by turning away. He called heaven and earth to witness this choice, urging them to choose life. Moses commissioned Joshua publicly as his successor, with God's direct instruction and assurance of presence. He then commanded that the entire law be written down and placed beside the Ark of the Covenant, to serve as a perpetual witness against Israel's potential rebellion. Every 7 years, during the Feast of Booths, the entire law was to be read aloud to all the people, men, women, children, and foreigners, ensuring continuous remembrance. In a deeply personal moment, God told Moses he would not enter the Promised Land due to his past disobedience at Meribah. Instead, he was to ascend Mount Nebo to view the land from afar. Before his death, Moses delivered a final blessing upon each of the tribes of Israel, a poetic and prophetic testament to their future. Finally, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died in the land of Moab at the age of 120, his eyes undimmed and his vigor unabated. God Himself buried him in an unknown place. Joshua, filled with the spirit of wisdom, then led the people, and Israel obeyed him. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses, there has never arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face.
Subscribe.